Welcome back to Caniac Chronicles, folks. I'm your chronicler, Andy, and this is episode 17 of season 1. Thanks for joining. All right, so do apologize. Last week was a busy week at work. I ended up having to travel, so I do apologize for not warning you in advance of that. But we're back this week. I unfortunately will be doing the same thing next week for my work. So next week, I might, when I get back from the trip, record over the weekend. We'll see where things are at with the team and all that. But for the time being, definitely won't be able to record midweek. So it'll be a little bit of a delayed release for next week's, if there is a release for next week. But nonetheless, we're here this week. We're having fun. So is the team. Carolina had today's the 10th, December 10th, in the evening. So Carolina's off today. They closed out their 7-game homestand last night with the Columbus Blue Jackets. Definitely, last night was definitely a morale win, not just for the team, I think, but for the fans at large, to be honest. There's definitely been, at least from my vantage point, there's definitely been frustration with the fandom. Some of it geared toward a specific person we'll get into later to start off the episode today. But like I said, last night, big win for the fans, big win for the team. They really needed that. They went down early, 1-0 in that game. I think Bussy let in the second shot on net, which is something I've brought up with Anderson being a problem, but slammed the door right after that. That was early in the game. I think it was about 5 minutes in. I could be way off, but it was in the first period. And the Canes didn't, they weren't able to match at all in the first period. So they ended that first period going back to the locker room down in the game. And that's something that no fan wants to see their team dealing with having to come back that early into the game already. But certainly with the circumstances, none of us wanted to see that with Carolina last night. So it was a huge turnaround for the team. They ended up scoring, tying it up before the second period ended, and then they really took full control of that game last night in the third. So today we'll touch back into the goaltender topic that I think I brought up last episode, maybe the one before that. But I just want to touch briefly on the goaltender situation, make a couple points and move on. And then we'll get into, we're going to get into a little bit of a conspiracy theory I have going on, really league-wide, but I first and definitely noticed and experienced it with Carolina at first. And I feel any good podcast definitely shares a conspiracy theory or two. So I guess I'll consider this podcast conspiracy theory to make it official. We're officially a bona fide podcast now once we've shared this. But anyway, starting off with the goaltender topic, Frederik Andersen is the hot topic right now, which is a little unfortunate because he's under the spotlight right now for some poor performance, while we have Brandon Bussy kind of in the shadows, demonstrating exceptional performance on the opposite end. And thank God he is, because I don't know where this team would be right now if it wasn't for Bussy to be standing, as tall as he is these days in the net. Not a slight toward Kochetkov at all this season. He's played a handful of games, if that. So I can't really slight the guy. He didn't even come into the season healthy. He wasn't playing preseason games. He had to do that brief stint with Chicago to kind of get his legs warm again. So he's had, he's had a season that we've been giving Anderson a pass on for the last 3 or 4 years now, which is dealing with injuries so far for the majority of it. So I'm willing to give Pyotr Kochetkov that pass in the same breath. And even, with that statement made, the performance from him is not nearly what it is right now from Anderson. it's tough to watch. It's been tough to be honest. It's been tough to watch for 3 to 4 years now. This is a topic that I have been very passionate, very vocal rather, not so much passionate about, but although I do show passion when I talk about it, it's more about being vocal. It's a conversation that I have had on numerous occasions in the past with my friends, my siblings, anybody who will hear a good rant about a hockey frustration, which is, I have just never thought that Anderson is the level of he doesn't provide that level of goaltending that you really that is demanded of any team who's looking to win a Stanley Cup, not just this one, but any team who is got their sights on a cup, who has enough of the pieces put together to maybe make an attempt at it, or show up late in the postseason to have the closest attempt at winning it. I just thought I've always thought his game has never been quite there, and that goes beyond being with Carolina, and not this part of it is not really within his control. He's a goaltender who's dealt with a significant amount of injuries, really, for the length of his career. That was something that we got into when I did talk about this in a bit more of a segment rather than a circle back. So, and that's the whole reason, why I started this podcast, is so that, one day when, I'm saying things over and over again, and I don't really hear the same sentiment from the fans when the time comes, and, what is the phrase, when the roosters come home to, I don't know, I'm fishing for something that's not even really at the tip of my tongue right now, but, when push comes to shove, there we go. There's a more simple phrase. When push comes to shove, I started this podcast so that would be something that I could reference back on, and pull audio, cite old past episodes, and kind of say, look, I've been saying this for a while, and it really should come to no surprise, because this fan base has been very much behind Freddie Anderson throughout this entire time. Until recently, like I've said. I think this past weekend he had a really bad game against Toronto last week, and I don't necessarily think that his post-game comments really helped him much. Not that they were, they weren't taking shots at anybody. They weren't really negative in the sense that it wouldn't have made ESPN news the next morning. But if you do listen to his post-game, it's a little lackluster. There's not a whole lot of passion put behind what he's talking about. Usually an often amount of times when you see players, and specifically hockey players, playing poorly, and they are interviewed, in the post game, a good number of them just really fall on the grenade themselves, and take that accountability upon themselves to admit, yes, I'm not playing to my ability. I'm not playing to the ability that this team needs me to play to. And there's, they hold a lot of accountability within themselves, as well as a lot of the accountability with regards to their teammates. And we just didn't see that from Anderson in that post-game interview following that shellacking we took from Toronto. So I guess my wife was showing me a number of different, TikTok videos. We were going through a few different comment sections, and it seems like the fan base is finally starting to get frustrated with this product of a goaltender that we have, and we've been stuck with for the last 3 or 4 years. And, our walking through this hopefully this final contract, but this 1-year deal that they have made with him in this past off season, and it's getting ugly. It's one thing I mentioned in that excuse me. This isn't something I want to harp on. I've already talked about it, I guess, for more than I really wanted to going into this episode, but I feel for Anderson. I feel for Freddie Anderson, the person. It's difficult to go through what he's going through. It's got to feel awkward, and I'm sure that maybe played a part in that interview that he had post game with Toronto. But if Freddie Anderson is the real deal, if what Carolina has seen in him for the last number of years, and even before the last number of years, because this is a guy that Carolina has tried to go after before, they finally made it work. So if some shred of that is within him, he needs to find a way to put it together before the end of the season, going into the playoffs, if he wants to have a shot at that one particular bonus in his contract. And he even really needs to figure it out soon within this regular season if he wants a shot at those incentives that he has in his contract for playing 35 and 40 games this season. I can sense that Rod is getting frustrated with the control that he has over this team. You see, he had an interview recently talking about Slavin, the first day that Slavin returned to the ice for practice, which I think was last week on Wednesday or Thursday, something like that. He was asked kind of straight up where he thinks we are in the sense of Slavin's return. And Rod kind of showed frustration that if it was up to him, we would have seen Slavin in the lineup a lot sooner than we haven't even seen him yet. So we would have seen him much earlier in the season return, whereas we still, sort of think that he's, at home, recovering, resting, whatever he needs to do, and is taking non-contact practices. But like I said, Rod is frustrated, and it seems like that, there are decisions that are being forced upon him with how this team is conducted. And I've always kind of had that sense, especially when it comes to the goalie situation and specifically the goaltending situation in the playoffs and how that plays out. If just knowing that Rod is a former player, I would have expected in the past to have seen him make a decision with regards to the goaltending, again, specifically in the postseason, a lot sooner than he did. And so I have always kind of called into question his authority with regards to the team. And I don't know if it comes from the owner. I don't know if it comes from the GM. I don't know if it comes from the front offices at large. I don't know who it comes from. But like I said, clearly Rod has some sort of frustration with his ability to do what he wants with this roster and this lineup. And so that kind of dovetails in here to what, my conspiracy theory has been, which is we are seeing an unprecedented, on the Hurricanes specifically, don't get me wrong, but like I said, this is sort of an at-large, league-wide scenario that I have noticed, which is that there's an unprecedented amount of players who are being placed on the on the injured reserve, or being put on day-to-day, or, just being sat or benched or, scratched for injury-related reasons. Just going through the full list of NHL injuries on ESPN, we have Boston with Charlie McAvoy, who's on the injured reserve, as well as a number of other players. You've got Buffalo, who has Josh Norris on the day-to-day status, as well as a few other players. Right now, it's just KK and Slavin listed for Carolina, but if you've been watching the team, we've been dealing with everybody in and out of the injury status with Miller, KK obviously, and Slavin obviously, but how many people have had to be pulled up to cover injured players this season? It's been unprecedented. Scott Wedgwood with Colorado, Tyler Sagan and Bichel in Dallas. We've got Trent Frederick and Kasperi Kapanen in Edmonton, as well as 4 other guys. Matt Tkachuk in Florida. Trocheck was on the list for a while for New York. Zuccarello in Minnesota. Rempe and Adam Fox for New York, Chabot and Pinto in Ottawa. Those are two big names on that roster. Rasmus Ristolainen with the Flyers. The Penguins have a litany of injuries, which do include Evgeny Malkin. Just going to pick out a few more that I see. Logan Couture in San Jose. We've got a handful of guys on San Jose that are out. A few people on Seattle. We've got another a decent amount of people on St. Louis, including Bukestad and Snuggerud. Tampa Bay is dealing with it. They have Ryan McDonough and Vasilevsky and Victor Hedman, as well as two other guys. Morgan Riley and Joseph Wall, Brandon Carlo with Toronto, Logan Cooley and Alexander Kerfoot in Utah, Elias Pettersson and Cheadle in Vancouver, Leonard and Carlson and Lindgren in Washington, and then Hayden Fleury and Connor Hellebuck in Winnipeg. What is going on with all the injuries in the NHL? And I have a simple and non-substantiated reasoning for it. It's simply because of the Olympics. And simply is a very quick way of putting all of that, but let's get into some details. Let's get into some specifics that I'd like to share on the matter. What happened this past season related to sort of the Olympics? The Four Nations tournament, right? Four Nations tournament, I think from the fans' perspective, was a pretty much all-out win. Specifically with, obviously, the USA and the Canadian bout in the preliminary rounds of the round robin. And the big fight that occurred in the first, how many fighting penalties did we have in the very first 15 seconds of that game? I mean, it was fireworks from the starting whistle, from the puck drop. And it was a really good product. Don't get me wrong. Watching that Four Nations tournament, especially as a United States, fan and citizen right now, it was good. Not New York, not New York. USA looked damn good, right? USA looks the way almost that Canada has always looked in the last, pick a number of decades. Because Canada has always looked stacked. Every time you go to see an international roster with Canada, it's stacked. And for once, the USA stands up to that roster, and the USA wins that preliminary round quite handily. But if you recall, by the end of that tournament, there was lots of injuries to be dealt with for all four nations, but specifically for Team USA and so specifically for Team USA and Team Canada, a number of injuries were getting dealt with by the end of that tournament. I mean, I don't know if anyone recalls, but there was all that drama around, Quinn Hughes is riding on an SUV to Boston to, step in for Team USA. Charlie McAvoy had a very bad injury in that tournament. Jacob Slavin had an injury in that tournament, and I speculate that same injury is what he has been dealing with this offseason and for the majority of this current regular season. Again, so that's setting the stage. So, that tournament happened. A considerable amount of injuries came out of that. The rumors were the rumor mill was swirling in the sense that GMs were not happy with that tournament, with the result of that tournament, with a lot of their stars having all those injuries. Matt Tkachuk, Brady Tkachuk, a lot of those guys were getting hurt. They were playing, I almost hate to say it, but they seem to have been playing even harder, than they played during the regular season for that tournament. And you can't blame them. I mean, it's the best players of all the teams put into one team. So every little half inch out there is going to matter whereas it's a full inch during just the regular season when you have the full mix of guys out there. So, but ultimately that tournament meant nothing. It meant absolutely nothing. It wasn't even recognized by the IIHF. So it was literally just an award, essentially, or a certificate, if you will, that the NHL sort of, awarded Team Canada for winning that tournament. I'm sure there might have been some bonuses for the players and, for the coaches and all that were handed out by the league, and that's great and all, but it's chump change, first of all. And second of all, again, it's not going to go down in the record books. Like the amount of money those players were paid out for that tournament is not going to be recorded and put, sent to the Hall of Fame to be etched in marble and never forgotten. No. Like that tournament seriously meant nothing. It was less than the MLB All-Star game. At least with the MLB All-Star game, some team gets home field advantage once this World Series rolls around. But that was basically it. And so GMs were upset. GMs were rightfully upset that there's, some of their best players were coming back beat up with more than, with much less than half the season to go before playoff time, where a lot of those guys needed to step up and provide work for their team that postseason. My next point in the conspiracy theory, let's see where the landscape is at right now. In the past, in the last, 7 years or so, we've really seen and criticized the salary cap loophole that we see in the postseason. And real quick, for those who aren't aware, in the regular season, every team is confined to a salary cap, meaning the collective average annual value of all the contracts that they hold for the players that they play on their regular roster has to add up to and be less than, I think it's about 82 and a half or so, somewhere around there. During the postseason, that's only during the regular season. During the postseason, players are not paid a regular salary, and therefore the salary cap has never applied to the postseason. So what we saw, and you can say this would be conspiratorial because it isn't actually officially confirmed by any one source that can directly confirm it to be true, but the writing is on the walls, and we can all see what goes on year in and year out. Vegas did it. Tampa did it a number of years. Florida had done it. And what it is when you have a big, high-paid player go down at some point in the season, if you assign them to long-term reserve, the LTR, or the LTIR, the long-term injury reserve list, then there's a loophole in the regular season that gives your franchise the amount of money that player was paid back toward your salary cap. So you can then go out with that extra money and find players to replace, the value that player brought to the team. In theory, it's a good rule to have. Any moral GM is going to thank, the heavens for that, and they're going to go out and probably get, like if it's a $10 million contract that you get back, they'll probably get at least 2 guys, probably even bring in 3 maybe, to keep the ship afloat during the regular season. And what teams were doing is they were, a big guy, a big name would go down, and they'd get a couple other big names or one really big name to come to the team. And as long as they timed things up, and for whatever reason, the guys who were hurt were always magically ready to go on night 1 or night 2 of the playoffs for that team. And, teams who didn't win the Stanley Cup also, had signs of this going into postseasons past. But, you would suddenly have a roster that in theory is, $15 million over the salary cap. But it's the postseason. Guys aren't getting paid, so they can do that. Vegas, Tampa, Florida. Very notable teams that did it. Very notable teams that also won while doing it. So And I'm not here to criticize that. It's a loophole. You're not doing anything illegal. So, it is what it is. You can be frustrated all you want, but hey, it was successful. Anyways, that is going away this season. This postseason, teams will have to comply with the salary cap. Wasn't originally going to happen this season, but they decided after releasing the new collective bargaining agreement over the offseason, shortly before the regular season began, they did decide to implement that, or close that loophole, for this upcoming postseason. But what is happening next year with regards to the salary cap? Well, it's increasing $7.5 million, which is a whole nother player, and a fairly decent player at that. $7.5 million a year will easily get you an above average player, a good guy to have on your team and contribute. You can rely on him probably for at least 60 to 90 points in a season on average, I would say, for about $7.5 million a year. Probably, maybe even better than that. You could probably even lean into about 75 to 105, 110 maybe, if it's a really, really good year. And then the following year after that, it will increase again, I think by the same amount, 7.5. So in 2 years, you'll have $15 million extra to work with in your salary cap going forward. Now, when you factor in the four nations, you factor in the salary cap I just mentioned, all that talk, all that conversation around that, as well as the Olympics coming up, which will put the NHL on vacation basically for, I believe, about 3 weeks, 2.5 to 3.5 weeks, depending on your franchise specifically, where guys are going to have to, they're going to be overseas. They're going to be in Europe. It's about a 6 or 7 hour difference, I think, to Milan, Italy. And they'll all have to come back and, undo that jet lag. Hopefully none of them get injured while being out there. It's risky. It is. And so I think what's going on this year is that when guys are going down, I think teams are just taking a lot more advantage of the farm system and the prospects that they have to give these guys, these top contenders, the McAvoys, the Slavins, the Trocheks, the Wedgwoods, the Sagans, the Kachucks, one more big name. I gotta find one more big name. Come on. Adam Fox, not big enough. Oh, Hellebuck, perfect. Vasilevsky, another good one. There you go. We got 2 extra ones in there. I think they're just ultimately giving these guys rest, relaxation, keep your keep your charge up, keep your battery up, and take that extra time to get fully better, fully rested, fully physically back into play. And Carolina is a team that really can afford that, to be honest. I know it's been a struggle to watch this team. They're not. It's a very competitive Eastern Conference right now, and they were holding that second place spot to Colorado for quite a while in terms of the league ranking, and they have kind of slipped from that sense. And I'm sure there's a lot of FOMO going on with watching Colorado do what they're doing with Natchez, and that's something we'll touch on, I think, the next episode. I almost said next week, but the next episode, whenever that gets recorded. But Carolina has been playing with a 2/3 roster. I'll call it that. I think that's very fair. They've been playing with no worse than a 2/3 roster, and they've been making it happen, right? They're, what are they now? 18-9-2, and they're sitting second in the division, and I think about third or fourth in the conference. They're okay. They're going to be fine. They're going to be just fine, especially once these guys get back. Slavin is fully healthy again, and you can rely on him a lot more. They're going to be just fine. And so right now I'm very comfortable with what's going on in Carolina in terms of the struggles that we're seeing from them. And, ultimately what this episode, or what this segment really was meant to be all about, is this injury thing. I think it's a fluke. I'm a conspiracist on it right now, to be honest. I don't think these guys are really that hurt. I just think that with all the circumstances currently in the league, it's time for everybody to take advantage of the injuries and the secrecy around injuries specifically in this league. You know, a guy gets a guy gets a concussion, a guy gets a fractured collarbone, and another guy shatters his orbital. And all three of those guys will be listed for an upper body injury. So, you know, with the climate and the culture around how injuries are handled behind the scenes in this league and how devious it has been over the last few years with people abusing that salary cap loophole, I think everybody, especially because they kind of see the writing on the walls, once the dust settles with the salary cap increases, it will be very prudent of you to know your plan going into the postseason when you are dealing with guys who truly need to be on the long-term injury reserved. And I'm not insinuating that anybody who's been put on the long-term injury reserved was unwarranted or it was, you know, suspicious or something. But I wouldn't put it past anyone either, especially a certain handful of franchises that I have talked about previously. Like I said, I think every team is now just taking advantage of it one last time in a different sort of way. We'll see what this means for the Olympics. This is also a good thing for the Olympics if my conspiracy is correct. It's a good thing because that means these players will also be going into that tournament fully rested, and that tournament should be electric if that is the case, because there are going to be a lot of good teams and good players playing on the ice at once as a team and as opponents this coming February. We'll see how far along the rink will be. That's a topic for a whole other conversation. But I guess Italy is having difficulties getting the ice facility built to host this tournament, host hockey games, and they've already confirmed that the size of the rink will not be up to par with what the NHL and the NHLPA had previously agreed to, should they let NHL players participate in this tournament. From what I have heard, though, the players don't really care, and they might just override whatever, you know, pre-agreement was made between all these organizations and parties and whatnot. So I think the Olympics will. It's just really it's going to be a matter of if this arena can be built or not by the time the games are set to play. To be honest, I come from an engineering background, and from an engineering standpoint, I have heard that the facility is set to be complete, I guess, 2 or 3 days before the Olympic Games, specifically the ice hockey games at the Olympic Games will be played. And just from a true, you know, engineer standpoint and knowing, you know, the human species, I am sort of worried in the sense of how safe this arena will be with regards to one thing or another, whether it's the, you know, integrity of the building, whether it's the accommodations for the players. I mean, it could be something as simple as like the door frames not being wide enough and guys always smashing their shoulders on. I mean, that's so stupid and right off the top of my head to say, but you know, these are things. These are things that go into the creation of buildings that if you rush them, you do not know what type of product you could end up with at the end of it. So, you know, that's just, again, a topic for another conversation there. But anyways, you know, Carolina, I'm not too concerned for this team. We'll see what the next few games look like, but I do think they're going to continue on with a pretty hefty dose of winning and collecting those points for the standings. One last topic I will brush on before we get going, something I have sort of lacked on in terms of the social media page, but Aho is struggling to get to rack up points. He has yet to record more than 2 points in one game. which is frustrating, only because I have money on the line for it. But he's just over 10.5 points behind the pace that he needed to maintain from day 0 to achieve 100 points in the final game of the season. So he's got a bit of climbing to do. When we started the season, he needed to record, if you remember, I think he needed to record about 1.21 goal or 1.21 points, or maybe it was 1.18, somewhere in that range, is what he needed to maintain in the beginning of the year to achieve 100 goals in the season. He now needs to start recording just under 1.5 points per game to achieve the same thing, which is what I am hoping he does, because I have money on him to hit 100 plus points this season, and I would love for that to pay out. So I'm wearing the Aho jersey today. I wore it at the last game we were at. I have a lot of faith in Aho. I do think he can still turn this around. There is something about Aho that is different this year. I think he has really taken it. I think he's really taken on a persona on this team that nobody has been able to previously. That persona, it's not identical. It's not a 1-for-1. Don't get me wrong. But that persona is that of a Matt Tkachuk. It's that of a Braden Point or who's the other guy? Kucherov, right? The other guy on Tampa Bay. But Brad Marchand, the pests. The guy, the sturdy forward, the sturdy power forward who can just get nasty. And play nasty and make and fabricate goals, fabricate points, fabricate opportunities for the team, play heavy defense. It's a side of Aho that I have not seen, I would say ever. I would say I think we had a glimpse of it maybe last year, or glimpses of the intention to be that way last year. But this year it feels like he's put in the work to actually personify that characteristic that those players carry around with themselves on the ice. And I'm very excited to see where that goes. I think it's just a matter of time for him. One thing to note with regards to him is, it's been probably 10 games or so now, maybe a little bit more, that Ehlers has been moved down so that Svechnikov can get back on that first line. And Svechnikov has been struggling to put the puck in the back of the net. So he's got a line mate who's struggling to score. He himself is struggling to score. Most of his points are coming from assists this season. But his ability is there, right? And as soon as Svechnikov starts finding the back of the net more, I think it's really going to start, those points should really start piling on. I made a prediction in the last, maybe not the last episode, but one of the episodes of recent. I made a prediction in the next 3 games. I want to see such and such from the team, and they fulfilled that prophecy, I guess, in the first game that they played after me speaking. So if I can speak something into existence again in the next 5 games, I'd really like to see 10 points from Aho, and I definitely want to see a 3-point night. In the next 5 games, we've got game 30 through game 34. Let me pull up the schedule so that we know who those teams will be, and then we'll end it. So they're going up to play Washington tomorrow night, so they'll be in Washington. Following that game, they will play again on Saturday, the 13th, in Philadelphia against the Flyers. Definitely a game that he can collect a point or 2 in, I think. And then again, so it'll be a back-to-back with Philadelphia. We'll all get on a plane together, or a bus, probably a plane. And they'll come back to Carolina for a home night, or an evening game, 5 p.m. Sunday night. another opportunity for Aho to score some points and rack up some points there. And that is the next 3 games, if I'm not mistaken. So then the fourth game will be against Nashville, in Nashville on Wednesday the 17th. I'm not going to pick a game, but if I would, if I expect him to get a 3-point night, that would be a very, very good opportunity to do so against Nashville. And then it'll be Friday, December 19th against the defending Stanley Cup champions, who are struggling at this point in time. So another good opportunity there, maybe, to scoop up some points. But yeah, let's see 10 points from Aho in the next 5 games. And I'd really, really like to see a 3-point night specifically from him. Kachuk should be back in the lineup, it looks like, too, for that game next Friday night, the 19th. Anyways, folks, thanks for listening to the podcast. I do appreciate it. I don't have any specifics to share at this point, but just know that the product that this podcast puts out on the socials and whatnot is going to step up here soon. I'm very excited. My wife got me the Canva Pro license for a year here for my birthday. Really excited to start playing with that. And pushing out more variations of content, really, for you all. More engaging stuff I'm hoping to put together. So stay tuned for that. Stick around, and hopefully some magical stuff. We'll come up with some magical stuff. I'm really excited to get into that and learn more about it, and leverage it too with the podcast. So. Anyways, folks, have a great rest of your day today. Stay safe out there. Go Carolina, and have a great day.